Most of what you were taught about history is wrong. Not in small, forgivable ways, but at the level of the biggest, most confident facts you carry around, the ones you would bet money on. And the reasons they are wrong reveal something unsettling about how the past really reaches us. Here is the uncomfortable truth. History is not a recording of what happened. It is a story, and stories are written by the people who win, the people who survive, and the people with a reason to make you believe one particular version over another. Over centuries, those versions harden into common knowledge that almost nobody ever stops to check. A convenient lie, repeated for long enough, becomes indistinguishable from fact. And some of these lies are sitting in your head right now. So today we are going to take the most famous facts from your history classes and pull them apart, one by one. The short emperor, the horned warriors, the doomed queen, the bloodthirsty arena, a queen's cruel joke she never made, and a dozen more. Some of these lies were honest mistakes that snowballed. Some were deliberate propaganda planted by enemies, and some survive simply because the truth is more complicated than a good story wants to be. Stay to the end, because the very last one changes how you see all the others. We begin with a man everyone is certain about, Napoleon Bonaparte, the furious little tyrant, so short he had a complex named after him, conquering Europe to make up for his height. It is one of the most repeated facts in all of history. It is also completely false. Napoleon stood about 5'7", which was average, even slightly tall for a Frenchman of his time. He was not short in the slightest. So how did an average-sized man become history's single most famous short person? The answer is a masterclass in how a lie gets built. His enemies, above all the British, waged a cartoon war against him. Their savage caricaturists drew him again and again as a screaming, stunted little brat in oversized boots, and those prints flooded across Europe by the thousands. For millions of people who would never see the real man, the cartoon simply became the man. The image was repeated so relentlessly that it replaced reality, which is exactly how the most durable lies work. There was even a measurement trick baked in. The French inch was longer than the English inch, so his recorded height of 5'2" in French units quietly converted to about 5'7" in English ones. But the small number was the one that crossed the channel and stuck forever. And his affectionate army nickname sealed it. His soldiers called him the Little Corporal, a term of warmth and respect, which his enemies gleefully twisted into a literal description of his body. So a man who rewrote the laws of the modern world, who reshaped an entire continent, is remembered 200 years later for a height he never had. Lie number 1, and already you can see the whole machinery of how history gets rewritten by the winners. Next, picture a Viking. You are almost certainly picturing a horned helmet, with great curved horns jutting from the sides. It is the single most iconic image of the Norse warrior in the entire world, and no Viking who ever lived wore one. Not one single horned helmet has ever been found in a genuine Viking grave or on a Viking battlefield, anywhere, ever. The archaeology is completely silent on them, which for such a famous fact should stop you in your tracks. And if you think about it for even a moment, the reason is obvious. Horns on a helmet are a disaster in a real fight. They are easy to grab, easy to use to wrench a man's head sideways, and they add useless weight. No warrior who wanted to live would ever wear them. So where did the horns actually come from? Not from the Vikings at all, but from a stage. In 1876, a costume designer for Wagner's opera cycle put horned helmets on his Norsemen to make them look dramatic, pagan, and wild for the audience. The image was so striking that it escaped the theatre and swallowed the real history whole. Within a single generation, everyone simply knew that Vikings wore horns. A costume invented 800 years too late, for a night at the opera, is now the first thing the entire world pictures when they think of the Vikings. Lie number 2, born on a stage and mistaken for 1,000 years of history. Now a woman you can picture instantly, Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the great Egyptian queen, the seductress of Rome. Everything about that sentence feels rock solid, and one crucial word in it is simply wrong. Cleopatra was not Egyptian. She was Greek. Cleopatra came from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Macedonian Greek rulers descended from one of Alexander the Great's own generals, who had governed Egypt for nearly 300 years. And throughout those 3 centuries, her family remained stubbornly, defiantly Greek in their language, their customs, and their bloodline. They ruled Egypt while holding themselves apart from it. In fact, her dynasty was so committed to staying Greek that for generations they refused to even learn the Egyptian language. Cleopatra was the striking exception, the first of her line in 300 years who actually bothered to learn the tongue of the people she ruled. And that was part of her genius. She deliberately presented herself as the goddess Isis, as a true daughter of Egypt, because she understood something her ancestors never did, that power is theater, and the right image can be worth an entire army. The Egyptian queen the world remembers was, in large part, a brilliant role that a Greek woman chose to play. Lie number 3, and this one she helped write herself. Now step into the Roman Colosseum, and the belief nearly everyone holds, that gladiators were expendable slaves who fought to the death for the crowd's amusement, dying by the thousands in an endless river of blood. The reality is stranger and far more businesslike. Gladiators were expensive. Training a skilled fighter took years and an enormous investment, and the men who owned them had absolutely no interest in watching that investment die every single afternoon. A dead gladiator was a burned fortune, so most matches did not end in death at all. The evidence from gladiator remains and records suggests a fighter had a strong chance of surviving any given bout, and many fought for years. Some won their freedom and retired. Others became genuine celebrities, with adoring fans, graffiti praising them on the walls of Pompeii, and even product endorsements. They were less like doomed slaves and more like dangerous, famous athletes. The relentless slaughter you are picturing is largely a Hollywood invention, layered on top of Roman propaganda that wanted its games to seem grander and deadlier than they usually were. Brutal, yes. A constant bloodbath, no. Lie number 4 was sold to you by the movies, and by the Romans themselves, who were the original masters of spectacle over truth. Here is a lie so famous it has come to define an entire queen. Marie Antoinette told that the starving peasants of France had no bread, supposedly sneered, then let them eat cake. It is the perfect symbol of royal cruelty and cluelessness, and she almost certainly never said it. The phrase appears in a book by the philosopher Rousseau, written when Marie Antoinette was just a child of around 10, living in Austria, years before she ever came to France. Rousseau attributed the line vaguely to a great princess, a stock figure, not a real named person. It was a literary device about royal detachment, not a quote from any specific queen. But when revolution swept France and the people needed a villain, the line was pinned onto Marie Antoinette to make her a monster worth hating, a ready-made symbol of everything the revolution wanted to destroy. She went to the guillotine partly on the strength of a cruelty she never uttered. Lie number 5 shows you how history hands the losers the worst possible lines, whether they said them or not. You have heard it your whole life. The Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from space or from the moon. It is repeated in classrooms, quiz shows, and textbooks the world over, and it is flatly untrue. From the moon, nearly 400,000 kilometers away, the entire Earth is a small blue marble. Seeing the Great Wall from there would be like trying to see a single human hair from 3 kilometers away. It is simply impossible. Even from low Earth orbit, where astronauts actually circle the planet, the wall is astonishingly hard to spot. It is long, but it is narrow, and it is made of stone and earth the same color as the ground around it, so it blends almost perfectly into the landscape. Astronauts have confirmed it again and again. You can see cities, airports, and highways far more easily than the Great Wall, which most cannot find at all without a camera's zoom. The myth is old, it turns out, older than spaceflight itself, invented long before any human ever left the ground, and simply never questioned once we did. Lie number 6 is a fact about space that was decided before we could even go there. Say the word Salem witch trials and a single image appears. Women tied to stakes, burning alive as a righteous crowd watches. It is one of the most vivid pictures in all of history. And in Salem, not a single accused witch was ever burned. The burning of witches did happen in parts of Europe. But in colonial Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692, the accused were tried under English law, and the sentence for their supposed crime was hanging, not fire. 19 people were hanged on a bleak rise called Gallows Hill. One elderly man who refused to enter a plea was pressed to death slowly under a pile of heavy stones. Others died in prison. It was a nightmare, but it was not a burning. The burning image comes from later plays, paintings, and films that borrowed the more dramatic European punishment and stamped it onto Salem, because fire simply makes for a more terrifying picture than a rope. So the most famous witch hunt in history is remembered for a punishment it never used. Lie number 7 proves that even our nightmares get edited for a better story. Sometimes history's lie is not a distortion, but a silence. There are wars so absurd, so embarrassing, that they were quietly dropped from the textbooks entirely, and they are some of the most revealing stories the past has to offer. In 1932, Australia declared war on birds. Enormous flocks of emus were destroying the crops of struggling farmers, so the government sent soldiers, armed with mounted machine guns, out into the fields to cull them. It became known, without a trace of irony, as the Great Emu War. The birds won. The emus scattered and sprinted, absorbed bullets with baffling resilience, and split into small groups that were impossible to target. After weeks of effort and thousands of rounds fired, the military withdrew, having genuinely lost a war to flightless birds. Or take the shortest war in recorded history, fought between Britain and the Sultanate of Zanzibar in 1896. From the first shot to the surrender, it lasted around 38 minutes. These stories are absurd, human and real, and precisely because they don't fit the grand, heroic narrative we like to tell about the past, we simply let them vanish. Lie number 8 is a lie of omission, of the things we quietly choose to forget. But if history hides its most absurd moments, it also buries some of its most beautiful. In the freezing December of 1914, in the mud and horror of the First World War's trenches, something happened that the generals did their best to erase from memory. On Christmas Eve, along parts of the Western Front, the shooting slowly stopped. German soldiers began to sing carols in their trenches, and across the frozen mud, the British soldiers answered them with carols of their own. Then cautiously, unbelievably, men began to climb up out of their trenches and walk into no man's land, the killing ground between the lines, with empty hands raised, unarmed. Enemies who hours before had been trying to kill each other now shook hands. They exchanged cigarettes, food, and buttons from their uniforms. They showed each other photographs of their wives and children. In several places, they played football together in the frozen mud. The commanders were horrified. This was not in any plan. It was dangerous, living proof that the ordinary men in the mud had no real quarrel with each other at all. Orders came down forbidding it from ever happening again. And the war ground back into its slaughter. But for one impossible night, the ordinary men simply decided together to stop. That truth was almost buried by those who found it inconvenient. Lie number 9 is the beauty they tried to make you forget. Ask who the richest person in history was, and most people will name a modern billionaire. They are not even close. The richest human being who ever lived, by most reckonings, was a 14th century African emperor named Mansa Musa, and his wealth was so vast it is essentially impossible to calculate. Mansa Musa ruled the Empire of Mali, which sat on top of staggering quantities of gold and salt at a time when the entire world economy ran on both. His wealth was not measured in mere fortunes. It was measured in a meaningful fraction of all the gold on earth. The world only truly grasped it when he made his pilgrimage to Mecca in the year 1324. He traveled with a caravan of tens of thousands of people, with dozens of camels, each carrying hundreds of pounds of pure gold. And along the route, passing through Egypt, he gave that gold away with such careless, staggering generosity that he accidentally crashed the entire region's economy for over a decade. So much gold flooded into Cairo that its value collapsed, and it took years to recover. One man, on a single journey, destabilized the economy of the medieval world simply by being generous. Yet most people today have never even heard his name, the single wealthiest human in all of history, missing entirely from the story we tell about wealth and power. Lie number 10 is the greatest fortune ever, hidden in plain sight. Look now at the Great Pyramids of Egypt, and the image burned into everyone's mind. Endless ranks of whipped slaves, dragging colossal stones under the lash, dying by the thousands to build a pharaoh's tomb. It is dramatic, it is famous, and it is wrong. The pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by paid, skilled Egyptian laborers, organized into professional work crews of free men who were fed, housed, and given medical care. We know this because archaeologists found their villages right beside the pyramids, their bakeries, their breweries that supplied a daily beer ration, and most tellingly, their tombs. Those workers were buried with honor, close to the pyramids they had built, a privilege that would never in 1,000 years have been granted to slaves. And their skeletons show injuries that had been carefully set and healed, proof they were valued enough to be nursed back to health. Building the pyramids was most likely a source of enormous national pride, a colossal shared project, part sacred duty and part steady employment, that united the kingdom for a season each year. The whip slave image comes overwhelmingly from much later retellings and Hollywood epics, not from the evidence in the sand. Lie number 11 is one of the most stubborn distortions of all. On the freezing night the Titanic sank in 1912, as over 2,000 souls faced the unthinkable, one small group of men did something that has echoed for over a century. The ship's musicians kept playing. As the great ship tilted and the lifeboats pulled away half empty, the band of 8 musicians gathered on the deck and played on, filling the terrifying dark with music, trying to keep panic at bay and give frightened people something human to hold onto. They knew there were not enough lifeboats. They knew almost certainly that they would not survive. Not one of the 8 musicians lived. They played until the very end, and then the sea took them with the ship. Unlike most of our other stories, this one is remembered, but it is often dismissed as sentimental legend, too perfect to be true. Yet survivor after survivor, in boat after boat, described the same thing: the music carrying across the black water as the ship went down. It is the rare piece of history that is both true and more beautiful than the legend. In the face of certain death, ordinary men chose courage and grace. Not every story history hands us is a lie. Some are just too good and true to let fade. Here is a name almost no one knows, belonging to a man who may have personally saved your life, and the life of everyone you have ever met. Stanislav Petrov. And the reason you have never heard of him is itself a kind of lie of omission. In September 1983, at the height of the Cold War, Petrov was the officer on duty in a secret Soviet bunker, watching the systems built to detect an American nuclear attack. And in the dead of night, the alarms screamed. The system reported that the United States had launched its missiles. His single job, his standing order, was to report it up the chain instantly, which would almost certainly trigger a full Soviet nuclear counterstrike and the end of the world. The screen said 5 missiles were inbound. The clock was running. But Petrov hesitated. Something felt wrong. Why would America start a world-ending war with only 5 missiles? It made no sense. Against all his training and orders, he judged it a false alarm, and he did not report it. He was right. It was a glitch, sunlight reflecting off high clouds and fooling the satellites. One man's doubt in one dark room is very likely all that stood between us and nuclear war. And for decades, the story was buried, a state secret on both sides. He received no reward, no parade, no fame. He simply went home. The man who may have saved human civilization is a footnote most people never read. Lie number 13 is everything history simply forgets to tell you. Some things you were taught are not lies of fact, but lies of timing, and this is the greatest of them all. Ask when the Roman Empire fell, and most people will say around the year 476. But half of Rome did not fall then. It survived in the East for nearly another 1,000 years. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered on the magnificent city of Constantinople, carried the flame of Rome through the centuries, while Western Europe fractured into small kingdoms. Its people still called themselves Romans. Its emperors still sat in an unbroken line of succession. Rome did not die in 476. It simply moved east, and it endured, rich and powerful, for another millennium, a fact that quietly erases 1,000 years from most people's mental map of history. The true end came in the year 1453, when the Ottoman Turks, armed with enormous new cannons, laid siege to Constantinople's legendary triple walls, walls that had held off every attacker for 1,000 years. For weeks the ancient city held. Then the great cannons finally broke through, the Ottomans poured in, and the last Roman emperor died fighting in the streets alongside his men, his body never found. When Constantinople fell, an empire that had begun with Augustus, stretching back over 2,000 years, finally, truly ended in 1453, not 476. An entire age died that day, and most people place its death nearly 1,000 years too early. Lie number 14 is off by a millennium. Finally, the man they simply called the Great, Alexander. In just over a decade, he conquered most of the known world, from Greece to Egypt to the very edge of India, undefeated in every battle he fought, before dying at only 32 years old. All of that is true, but the tidy legend hides how strange his story really is. We picture a golden, noble hero, but Alexander was also ferociously ruthless. He burned cities to the ground, executed close friends in drunken rages, and drove his exhausted army to the ends of the earth until his men finally, flatly refused to march one step further. The legend carefully sands off the darkness to leave only the glory, exactly as it does with every conqueror we decide to admire. And then there is the mystery that has never been solved. At the absolute height of his power, Alexander suddenly fell ill in the city of Babylon and was dead within days. Was it a fever? Was it poison? Was it grief and hard drinking? 2,000 years later, we still genuinely do not know what killed him. His empire shattered the very instant he died, torn apart and carved up by his ambitious generals, each seizing a piece. And one of those generals founded the dynasty that 3 centuries later produced a certain Greek queen of Egypt named Cleopatra, where this whole story began. History, it turns out, is a single tangled web, not a list of separate facts. Lie number 15 is how connected it all secretly is. Here is a lie you were probably taught as heroic fact, that that Christopher Columbus bravely proved the Earth was round, sailing west while terrified, ignorant medieval people begged him not to fall off the edge of a flat world. Almost none of that is true. Educated people had known the Earth was a sphere for nearly 2,000 years before Columbus was born. The ancient Greeks had not only proven it, they had calculated its size with startling accuracy, using nothing but shadows and mathematics. Medieval scholars, sailors, and kings all knew perfectly well that the world was round. It was simply not in dispute. The idea that everyone thought it was flat was largely invented centuries later, in the 1800s, to make the medieval world look more ignorant than it was. The real argument about Columbus was not the shape of the Earth, it was its size. Columbus thought the world was far smaller than it is, and that Asia was just a short sail west. His critics correctly argued it was much too far. His critics were right. The only reason Columbus and his crew survived is that an entire continent, the Americas, happened to be sitting in the way, a place he never even realized he had found. He was saved by a mistake, not vindicated by courage. So the man we credit with proving the Earth was round proved no such thing, and stumbled onto 2 continents while being wrong about basic geography. Lie number 16 turned a lucky error into a legend of genius. Return for a moment to the Vikings, because the horned helmet was not the only lie about them. We picture them as filthy, unwashed savages, reeking of blood and mud. In reality, the Vikings were among the cleanest, most groomed people of their entire age. Archaeologists keep digging up their grooming kits. Intricate combs, tweezers, razors, and ear cleaners, often beautifully carved from bone and antler, and clearly used constantly. Vikings cared deeply about their appearance. English chroniclers of the time actually complained that the Norse were too clean and too well groomed. They bathed at least once a week, far more often than most Europeans of the era, and used that grooming to charm the local women, to the locals' great annoyance. They even made their own soap, and used it not just for washing, but to bleach and style their hair into fashionable lighter shades. These were not grimy barbarians. They were vain, meticulous, and cleaner than the people writing insults about them. The filthy savage image was pure propaganda from their frightened enemies, and it stuck for 1,000 years. Lie number 17 is that the Vikings were dirty, when the truth is they probably smelled better than the monks recording their raids. You have almost certainly heard this comforting story, that Albert Einstein, the very symbol of genius, failed mathematics as a schoolboy. Parents and teachers repeat it to struggling children everywhere, and it is completely false. Einstein was, in fact, brilliant at mathematics from a very young age. He had mastered advanced calculus by the time he was 15, years ahead of his peers, and excelled in the subject throughout his schooling. When he was once shown a claim that he had failed maths, Einstein himself laughed it off and flatly denied it, saying he had never failed at mathematics in his life. The myth likely comes from a confusion over a school grading system that was, at one point, reversed, so that his top marks briefly looked like bottom ones to people who didn't understand the scale. We cling to this lie because we want it to be true. We want the greatest genius to have once been a failure, so that our own failures might hide a hidden genius. Lie number 18 is a comforting story we tell ourselves, and it never happened. Here is a myth so common it powers entire movies, that you only use 10% of your brain, and that if you could just unlock the rest, you would gain superhuman powers. It is a wonderful idea. It is also biological nonsense. Brain scans show that you use virtually all of your brain, and over the course of a day, essentially every region lights up and does real work. There is no vast, dormant, unused continent sitting idle inside your skull. Evolution is brutally efficient. The brain burns around 1/5 of all the energy your body uses, despite being a small fraction of your weight. Your body would never build and fuel a massive organ, only to leave 90% of it switched off. Damage to almost any part of the brain, even a small part, causes real and measurable problems, which simply could not happen if most of it were doing nothing at all. The myth probably grew from misunderstood science and wishful thinking about untapped human potential, but the truth is you are already using all of it. Lie number 19 sells the fantasy of a hidden superpower you were never actually missing. Picture the fall of Rome to fire, and you picture the Emperor Nero standing on a balcony, playing his fiddle and grinning as his city burns below him. It is the definition of a callous tyrant, and it could not have happened the way you imagine. For a start, the fiddle did not exist. The bowed violin would not be invented for roughly another 1,500 years. Whatever Nero did during the Great Fire of Rome, he most certainly did not do it on an instrument that would not exist until the Renaissance. And according to some accounts, Nero was not even in Rome when the fire broke out. He was at his villa outside the city, and when news reached him, he reportedly rushed back to help organize relief efforts and open his own gardens to the homeless. Nero was, by most measures, a genuinely bad emperor, vain and murderous. But the specific image of him fiddling with glee while Rome burned was largely propaganda, spread by later writers and enemies who wanted him remembered as a monster. So a phrase we still use today for callous indifference, fiddling while Rome burns, is built on an instrument that didn't exist and an emperor who may have been trying to help. Lie number 21 is a slander so good it became a saying. Every American child learns it. Young George Washington chops down his father's cherry tree, and when confronted, bravely declares, "I cannot tell a lie," and confesses. It is the perfect story of honesty, and the story itself is a lie. It never happened. There is no evidence Washington ever chopped down any such tree, and the tale appears nowhere until after his death. It was invented by a biographer named Parson Weems, who added it to a later edition of his book about Washington specifically to sell copies, and to give children a tidy moral lesson about honesty. The irony is almost too perfect. The single most famous story about a man who supposedly could not tell a lie was, itself, completely made up. A fable about honesty, born from a fabrication. It endured because it was useful, a clean little parable for teaching children. And that is exactly how so much of history is built, not from what happened, but from the lessons we wished had happened. Lie number 22 is a lie about telling the truth. Walk into many a medieval castle museum and you will find them. The Iron Maiden, a coffin lined with spikes to impale its victim, and racks of gruesome devices proving how barbaric the Middle Ages truly were. Most of them are fakes. The infamous Iron Maiden, the spiked cabinet, has no genuine medieval origin at all. There is no reliable record of one ever being used in the Middle Ages. It was assembled and popularized in the late 1700s and 1800s, cobbled together from other objects to thrill and horrify. The Victorians were fascinated by a dark, brutal, superstitious vision of the medieval past, partly to make their own age feel enlightened and advanced by comparison. So they built the props to match the story they wanted to tell. Real medieval justice could certainly be harsh, but a great deal of the theatrical, cartoonish cruelty we associate with the era was manufactured centuries later, for museums, shock and profit. So the Dark Ages were, in part, darkened on purpose, by later generations who found a barbaric past more entertaining and more flattering to themselves than the real one. Lie number 23 is a horror show built long after the curtain fell. Say the Spanish Inquisition and you imagine a centuries-long orgy of torture and burning that consumed millions of innocent people across Europe. It was real, and it was frightening, but the scale you are picturing is wildly, provably wrong. For decades, historians have pored over the Inquisition's own meticulous records, because it documented its cases obsessively, and those records tell a very different story from the legend of endless slaughter. Over roughly 350 years of operation, the Spanish Inquisition executed an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 people. A real horror for each victim, but a tiny fraction of the millions that popular myth imagines. Many of its trials, by the brutal standards of the time, were actually more procedural and better documented than the secular courts around them, which were often far more arbitrary and deadly. So where did the myth of endless massacre come from? Largely from propaganda, spread by Spain's Protestant enemies, who had every political and religious reason to paint Catholic Spain as uniquely, monstrously evil. The Inquisition needs no exaggeration to be disturbing, but the cartoonish version you inherited was a weapon in a propaganda war between rival powers. Lie number 24 inflated a real horror into an imaginary one for political gain. And then there are the smaller lies, the ones that slip by without anyone ever pausing to question them. Like the story that Napoleon's soldiers shot off the nose of the Great Sphinx with a cannon during his Egyptian campaign. But sketches of the Sphinx made decades before Napoleon was ever born already show it without a nose. The damage was done centuries earlier, most likely deliberately chiseled off by someone long before any French cannon arrived. Napoleon took the blame for vandalism he never committed. Or the belief that a bull charges because it hates the color red. In truth, bulls are red-green colorblind and cannot even distinguish the color. What enraged the bull is the movement of the cape, not its color at all. Or the grim idea that in medieval times, people rarely lived past 30. That number is an average dragged down by tragically high infant mortality. If you survived childhood, you had a very good chance of living into your 60s or beyond. Each one is small, Each one is repeated with total confidence, and each one is wrong. Together they show how a confident tone and endless repetition can turn almost anything into a fact. Lie number 20 is really 100 tiny lies, hiding in plain sight. So why does history lie to you so consistently? Not usually through some grand, shadowy conspiracy, but through something quieter and much harder to fight. History is passed down by human beings, and human beings prefer a clean story to a messy truth every single time. A short, angry tyrant is easier to remember than an average-sized reformer. Horned barbarians are more thrilling than practical raiders. A cruel queen with a wicked one-liner is neater than a complicated real person. The version that survives is almost never the truest one. It is simply the one that tells best. And layered on top of that very human habit sits deliberate distortion. Propaganda by enemies, flattery by allies, and the quiet erasing of anything embarrassing or inconvenient. Winners write, losers vanish, and 1,000 small edits harden over the centuries into what you have always called common knowledge. The lie doesn't need a villain, it just needs time and repetition. The real lesson here is not that any single fact is wrong. It is that you should hold all of it a little more loosely. Stay curious. Ask who benefited from the version you were handed, and never mistake a good story for a true one. Because every fact you feel certain about has a story underneath it that someone, somewhere, once had a reason to shape. The past is not a settled thing. It is an argument we are still having. If pulling these 15 apart hit you the way it hits us, then subscribe and stay. Because this is exactly what we do here, unteaching the history you were handed, one buried truth at a time.